January. So the project has gone right the way through the seasons. And the first part of the bit that I've done was researching local folklore and traditional stories and songs from this part of the land, which meant talking to local people. It meant talking to people that had written about this particular piece of land, and then raking all that stuff up, gleaning it together, and then taking out the bits that felt relevant. And the way that we did that was by actually walking on the landscape, meeting people, going to the pubs, hanging around here, spending a lot of time on the hills, in the woods. So getting a very personal sense for what the landscape is, and then mapping onto the top of that how the old folklore and the old stories and the traditions of the landscape, whether they were still there, whether they were still echoes of them, whether they were still creeping behind trees and buried in the earth.
I think it was interesting for us to research local music and stories and sayings, and not so much history, but the sort of lost part of history that's not quite so factual, and what times were like before people had television and mass media and everything coming in from America, and you know, people's own culture and our own culture. And particularly with English music, even in the folk scene that I work with quite a lot, there's not so much interest in English music.
So we crafted, Fiona as a musician, me as a storyteller, crafted a piece that was a Blackdown story with lots of Blackdown folklore in it.
And we performed that at various locations. We performed it in schools and in pubs, and in a season of woodland workshops.
So the stories and the songs were the starting point with of how we were relating to the community.
There came a pit-patter and somebody says, "Cold lies the dew. All of your life you have minded our ways. Cold lies the dew. With a pail of spring water and cream bowl too, they led her away in the May morning dew. Cold lies the dew, singing green, 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 all a green, all a green, a dancing round the tree."
The point of doing it is to engender a creative reconnection to landscape and to place. And when you have a more creative response to where you live, then you have more respect for it. And if you have respect, then you're going to look after it. And if you're going to look after it, then maybe, who knows, we might not damage and wreck and destroy what we have in such a vicious way as we're doing now.
I'm just trimming around these, but it doesn't matter because you're going to be having it hung up. It's not meant to be. We're making lanterns for Punkie Night, and we're going to have a big procession up through the forests as it goes dark, with children carrying lanterns, and then there will be songs and poems and folklore and all sorts of wonderful things happening.
Punkie Night is an old Somerset tradition. It's always been based around the time of Samhain or Halloween. The story was that the men were all working down on the levels, they got very drunk on cider, the women wanted them to come home, so they made lanterns out of wurzels and swung them around at the top of the hill, so the men staggered their way home and the women were very angry. But of course it overlaid on old fire ceremonies that happened before that.
It's just quite exciting doing different sort of art things within the landscape that makes people look at the landscape in a different way, or just sort of makes them belong a bit more. They've got involved in some way that they hadn't thought of, and it's kind of knitted them in a bit.
The other aspect to all this is about being playful. It's about not having that straight line thinking that we have when we go to work and we go to the office and we jump in our car and we put the heating on. It's to do with lateral thinking. If you engage with the imagination and you engage with individuals' creativity, something very different happens. And that's what's really exciting, and I think that's what makes a difference.
To be out here with our lanterns? Yeah! Are we lucky it's not raining? Yeah! Punkie night tonight. It's Punkie night tonight. Give us a candle, give us a light. It's Punkie night tonight.
The more stillness that I can experience in a place like this, the more I have a sense of all the people that have been here before, the fact that we're here for such a short time and that there'll be many, many people afterwards, and that nature has its own rhyme and its own rhythm, and that if somehow I can be part of that, then I'll be able to really remember who I am.